Hello everyone, this is Dr. Jenkins. We are back for another lecture in nutrition. And guess what? We have finished all of the macronutrients. So, logically, what comes next after our macronutrients? It is our micronutrients. So this week, we're talking about vitamins. All right, big blue screen this time. Okay, so we spent a lot of time talking about the macronutrients, and now we're going to talk about the micronutrients, which, as you remember, doesn't mean that they're smaller in size. Micronutrients means that they're equally as important. We just need them in smaller amounts. And in the introduction to this course, weeks and weeks ago, when we began talking about these, I talked about the supporting cast. I talked about the macronutrients like the supporting cast. Sometimes you don't necessarily always think about them because they're not the star, but you couldn't do the show without them. So they're still just as important. All right, so of course you remember that our micronutrients are vitamins and minerals. This week we're talking about vitamins. We're going to be talking about some of the specific functions of vitamins, but we're going to talk about the specific vitamins as we go along. What I do want to point out is we absolutely need vitamins, could not live without them, and they do not produce energy. So it's not like carbohydrates or fat or even protein in smaller amounts. Vitamins are not going to be used in our body for energy. Now, that is true. What we're going to find out is the B vitamins indirectly help us make energy. So they have a role in it, but it's still the carbohydrates or the fat that are being burned for energy. Okay. Again, I'm skipping back. If I skip through it, you don't necessarily need to know it, right? I'm going to be circling or putting a star beside all the important things. Okay. Before we even go vitamin by vitamin, I want to talk about some of the specific characteristics of vitamins. And I apologize because I need to get some tissues for myself. I'm so sorry. It's getting to be allergy season, and the allergies seem to be just having a lot of fun with my body. Okay, so when we talk about vitamin characteristics, there's going to be some things that we didn't talk about for the macronutrients. Again, I apologize for blowing my nose. Okay, we have to consider something called bioavailability. And if you break the word down, it will make sense. Bio refers to a living body. Availability is the availability. So bioavailability really means the availability of these vitamins in our body. More specifically, it's the rate at which they get into our body and are usable. What I want to point out is it is different. So for certain vitamins, some have a higher bioavailability, some have a lower bioavailability. We're not going to get into specifics, so I'm not going to ask you, does this vitamin have a high or low bioavailability? But I do just want to point out that this is something to consider. So be able to define bioavailability, the rate at which the vitamins that we bring in are absorbed and usable by the body. And it depending on the vitamin you're talking about. There's some other things that can influence a bioavailability, how we prepare the food, for example, and other things. You don't have to know these specifically, but I'm just saying that there are factors that can influence how easily or how quickly we can absorb these vitamins and get them available to the cells that need them. Now, I do want to point out one example. So I did put X's beside most of these, but I will circle this one because I think it's an interesting example. Something that's interesting about cooking method. Our bioavailability is highest when the foods are raw. So we can absorb more vitamins when something is raw. By cooking it, it lowers the bioavailability. So you should know this. But does this mean that we should never eat cooked vegetables? Of course not. As a matter of fact, eating only raw vegetables can, even though it's good for bioavailability, it can have some other negative side effects. For example, getting all that roughage through your GI tract can be difficult. So I'm not saying that eating all cooked vegetables, that we should never eat cooked vegetables, but because of this consideration, maybe it's good to mix them up. Have a couple raw with lunch and then have some cooked with dinner if you want to maximize the bioavailability. There's some other characteristics that we didn't have to talk about with our carbs, fat, and protein. One of them is toxicity. And it is absolutely the case that sometimes if we take in a really high amount of a certain vitamin, it can be toxic to our body. That's not true for carbs. It's not true for fat. So this is something that is potentially true for vitamins. And the reason is, we're meant to bring in these vitamins in smaller amounts. It's a micronutrient. We don't need that much to enable our body to have what it needs. So if you bring in a lot, it's very difficult for your body to deal with. You can read about precursors, but I'm not going to ask you about this. Sometimes when we bring in a vitamin, it's technically in an inactive form. And then we require something else to quote unquote activate it. But I'm not going to ask you about that. Okay. What I would absolutely underline, exclamation point, smiley face, boom. What I would like you to know, absolutely. Vitamins are considered to be organic. And what this means in our body is that they are more fragile. And this is different than minerals. Minerals, what we're going to find out next chapter, minerals are not organic. So therefore, they're less fragile. But our vitamins, they're organic. And that means they're fragile. You know this. If you leave a certain fruit out in the open air, like a banana, if you peel it and leave it out, if you cut open an apple and leave it out, the exposure to oxygen will cause the apple or the banana to start to kind of break down, right? This is particularly true with vitamin C. You can see that oxygen, the oxidation process, begins to break down the fruit. And of course, it disrupts the vitamin C that we would love to get from it. So I'm not going to ask you about the specifics at the bottom, but just know that vitamins, unlike minerals, are organic, and that means that they're very fragile. So if we don't take care of them, store them properly, we will lose that vitamin content. You can read more about this. In order to prevent vitamin loss, store things in airtight containers, refrigerate, steam veggies in a small amount of water. Don't boil your vegetables, please. Just steam them in a little tiny bit of water. They'll keep their crunch, they'll be delicious, and they'll keep their vitamin content. Look at that. Okay, so those are the basic characteristics that I'd like you to know. So we're going to go through the vitamins one by one, talk about what its function is, but before we do that, there are 13 main vitamins, right? And we tend to group them into two categories. You should know this. Either a vitamin is considered water-soluble or fat-soluble. And this really means, does it dissolve in water? If the answer is yes, if a vitamin is able to dissolve in water, it is classified as water-soluble. If it is not able to dissolve in water but can dissolve through a fatty membrane, it is fat-soluble. Here you go. The way that I do this is I just memorize one, and then the other is true by a process of elimination. The fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, K. Boom. This means that we need to have a certain type of fat in our body in order to absorb these. So I know we mentioned a lot of functions of fat. We talked about fat being insulation, protection, long-term energy. Well, guess what else? We need certain types of fat to be able to absorb vitamins. And this means that the remaining two, vitamins B and C, are considered to be water soluble. So let's just start with that for now. Being able to say which vitamins are which. Okay, because now we're going to talk about the characteristics of the water-soluble vitamins versus the fat-soluble vitamins. Yeah. I skipped a bunch of slides because I knew this summary was here. So this is a really great summary, and I'm going to point out a couple things. These are written in the previous slides in terms of how they're digested, absorbed, and stored. Let me just point out the most important things. Okay, so obviously we need you to know the water-soluble vitamins are B and C, and that means they can dissolve in water. The fat-soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K, which means they cannot dissolve in water, but they can dissolve in fat. What this means is, let's see, I'm trying to just make sure I think about what I want to point out here. Okay, let's talk about transport. With the nature of this, water-soluble hormones can travel freely in the blood. The blood is largely water. So if these are water-soluble, these can dissolve in the bloodstream, and there you go. Because the fat-soluble vitamins cannot dissolve in the water of the blood, they require a carrier. Storage. Water-soluble vitamins, we have to store in the bloodstream, which means they circulate freely. So we store in bloodstream, which means we can't store large amounts. If I go back, the water soluble, they circulate freely in the bloodstream, so we use as needed. And that means that we cannot store a large amount. And because we cannot store large amounts, we need to bring them in frequently. Frequent doses, but smaller doses, right? So water soluble, it travels directly in the blood because it can dissolve in water, which is the bloodstream. It's stored in the bloodstream, but we cannot store large amounts. And because of that, because we cannot store large amounts, the water-soluble vitamins we need to bring in more often. On the other hand, the fat-soluble vitamins we can store. So we can put some fat-soluble vitamins on the storage shelf in the liver, in fat tissue, in muscle tissue. And because it can be stored, we don't need to bring in as much. So we can bring in our fat-soluble vitamins more periodically. All the rest on this slide is extra. But make sure you review what I've put a star beside. All right, now, I know it can be boring because there's so many vitamins and blah, blah, blah. You're not going to have to know everything. I'm just going to point out some. Okay? Also, on Blackboard, there is a summary sheet called Vitamin Overview. I recommend that you use this, either print it out or download it and you can type in it. This is a beautiful summary of the vitamins, and then you can just write in whatever it is you need to know to try and simplify it. Okay, before we start going vitamin by vitamin, a quick note. You do not need to know this, but I'm just making a point, folks. It's different from our macronutrients. When we talked about carbs, fat, and protein, we talked about the needs, not only in percentages of our diet, but we also talked about the needs in grams. Because they're macronutrients and we need more of them, we talked about grams because we needed a bunch. Well, these micronutrients, like vitamins, we don't need as many. So we're not going to talk about grams. Instead, sometimes we'll talk about milligrams. Or for other types of vitamins that we don't need as many of, we may talk about micrograms. That's this funny U thing. Or sometimes there'll be something called an international unit, which is a little bit more complicated. My point is, you'll see different units. Don't stress about the different units. You might see them, that's okay. Overall, because of our vitamin needs being smaller, these are going to be smaller units. All right. Okay, folks, buckle up. Have your vitamins handout ready. If you need to pause the video, go get it. Do what you got to do. We're going to start by going through some of the fat-soluble vitamins. We recall the fat-soluble vitamins are A, D, E, K. So we're going to start with A. We like to be alphabetical, which just makes sense. Everything's good in the world. We can get vitamin A from animal sources, and we can get vitamin A from plant sources. I'm going to give an example. An animal source that contains a lot of vitamin A would be organ meats, everyone's favorite. Come on, liver and onions? One of the examples of our plant sources of vitamin A would be carrots. You can see I'm picking out only a couple things. On your upcoming quizzes and midterm exam and later final exam, you can imagine some matching or multiple choice. For example, which of the following foods would be high in vitamin A? And you would look for organ meats and carrots. Of course, there's others. All right. We only have so much time, though. We are going to give a function for each one. So, vitamin A, we think about eyes. And something that you may not be familiar with, vitamin A helps with our gene expression, the genes or the DNA. So those are our two main functions. I know it's kind of boring, folks, but these are not boring functions for your body. I mean, for those of us that are fortunate enough to have the ability to see and utilize our eyes, we want to keep that. So we need some vitamin A. I mean, I can't think of something else any more important than DNA, our ability to express the DNA instructions and our genetics. So I know that it's not sexy. I know. But eat your carrots so you can have good gene expression. You can read more about how specifically the vitamin A is helpful. It's actually helpful to our rods and cones, which are these small cells in the back of our retina. But you don't need to know that. Here is an example of our daily needs, but you don't need to know that. I just don't think it's a good use of your time to memorize these. This is a good resource, though. I mean, if someone stops you in the store and says, hey, what are my daily needs for vitamin A? You can see, hold on. Pull out your phone, pull up this PowerPoint. Well, you know what? For adult males, about 900 micrograms, and for adult females, 700 micrograms. So you have the information, folks. Just don't have to memorize it. Now, I do want to point out excessive amounts from animal sources can be toxic. That's all I'm saying. Excessive amounts from the animal sources can be toxic. If you remember, one of the characteristics of vitamins is that unlike our macronutrients, there's some possibilities where if we bring in too much, it can be toxic to our body. If you were to get too much vitamin A from supplements, you might get this orange pigment in skin, which is not life-threatening or toxic. So you don't need to know that. But too much from animal sources. Too little. I mean, I'm going to circle this, but I think if you remember the function of vitamin A, you don't even need to memorize this. Because if you don't have enough vitamin A, it's going to interrupt our ability to do its functions. And one of the functions was to help with our vision. Excuse me. Now, of course, this is not usually a problem in the United States. And unfortunately, it's not because we get a lot of carrots in our diet. Again, I'm so sorry. And the way that most of us get enough vitamin A is that our milk, for example, is fortified with vitamin A and vitamin D. Okay, speaking of vitamin D, it's like I did that on purpose. All right, vitamin D. Okay, we can get some vitamin D from food. So it's possible to get some vitamin D from food, but it's also possible for our body to make vitamin D with help from the UV rays. So what I want to point out here with this one, it's not like we absorb vitamin D directly from the sun. We absorb the UV rays. And then our body makes vitamin D, utilizing some things from those UV rays. So it's not that we directly absorb vitamin D from the sun, folks. Instead, we absorb the UV rays, which help our body in the process of making vitamin D. Everything else on this screen is extra. Where do we get it? Well, we can get it in food. So let's give an example of breakfast cereals, because they're fortified, folks, and fortified milk. See, can I zoom in on this? Yeah. It's kind of hard to see, but if you see vitamins A and D, it's fortified. Yes. Right, look at here. Vitamins A and D. Yep. Alrighty. So what are the functions of vitamin D? It's all about the bones. Vitamin D, one of its main functions is to help keep our bones nice and strong. It does that through helping to regulate our blood calcium. So that's kind of more behind the scenes, but we can just simplify it and say vitamin D, its main function is to help with our bone health, keeps our bones nice and strong. You can read about the daily exposure. I'm not going to ask you any of these. Most of us are able to get enough through bringing in enough UV rays, but you got to think about certain times of year. You got to think about what someone's job is, if they're sitting in a cubicle all day, not getting outside, living in a climate such as we do in Albany, where in the wintertime it's very cloudy, cold, we don't go outside as much. So here's the information, but I'm not going to ask you about these. You can read about the possibility of too much, but what I want to point out is if we don't have enough, well, just like I said with vitamin A, if you know the function, then you could figure out what some of the problems could be if you don't have enough. So if our vitamin D functions in bone health, if we don't have enough vitamin D, we're going to have some bone problems. Rickets is a particular bone problem common in children with vitamin D deficiency. They have those bowed legs. And it could lead to something called osteomalacia in adults, which is a similar form just in adults. But we just need to think about bone problems. If we don't get enough vitamin D, it of course could lead to some bone problems. Okay, so we're still on the fat-soluble train, right? Vitamins A, vitamin D. Now we're on vitamin E. Here we go. You can read about what it is, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about sources. Ooh, you're going to see me say this a lot. And I get a little excited, but you have to forgive me. I do, after all, teach nutrition. One example of a food source of vitamin E are the leafy green vegetables. And that's what this picture is showing you up here. Leafy greens are so good for you. They have so many vitamins and minerals. You're going to see a trend, right? As we continue going through this chapter and the next chapter on minerals. Leafy greens, leafy greens. Fantastic source of vitamin E. The main function of vitamin E that we're going to talk about is an antioxidant. An antioxidant, you've probably heard of this. Not only can it be in foods, it can also even be in, for example, facial creams, but it's really a protectant. Inside our body, these antioxidants help protect our cells. They protect us against these things called free radicals, which are just dangerous byproducts of things. But just think of it as a protectant. An antioxidant is going to help keep your cells healthy and lessen your risk of getting sick. So really good antioxidant, protector. All the rest here is extra. You can read about too much or too little. I'm not going to ask you about these. And I did mention antioxidants, so they're protectants. I mentioned these things called free radicals. Free radicals are these dangerous byproducts. So just associate free radicals with antioxidants. Antioxidants help to kill free radicals. I just wanted to write kill on the screen. So the antioxidants are a protector. They keep our cells healthy. They protect our body from these dangerous byproducts called free radicals. And as a matter of fact, there is research that shows a correlation between high free radical levels and incidences of cancer, heart disease, etc., etc. So a healthier diet, getting enough of these antioxidants, which we're also, by the way, going to find in vitamin C later in this discussion, can be so helpful to us. But vitamin E is a really powerful antioxidant. Protect us against these dangerous byproducts called free radicals. You don't need to know any more specifics. I love this picture because, we'll use, these antioxidants are green. They're going to go and they're going to kill, basically, or neutralize the free radicals and protect our body. Okay. All right, so our last fat-soluble vitamin. We did A, D, E. Now we're on to vitamin K. You can read about what it is. I'm not going to ask you. Green vegetables. Not necessarily leafy greens, because here we have a broccoli and asparagus. Not leafy, but, asparagus is. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts. Green vegetables, vitamin K. Vitamin K plays a really important role in blood clotting. So there's all these important things in our body that we just take for granted, and when we just eat like crap, we're really testing our body and we're not being appreciative or understanding of what all these body systems need. Under normal circumstances, our blood can clot really well. You get a cut, apply some pressure, cover it up, put a Band-Aid over it, heals in a couple days. Boom. There's so much going on in that process. Your body is sending thousands of clotting factor chemicals, and many of those clotting factor chemicals need vitamin K to be produced. So we take it for granted. All these vitamins, even though we don't need them in large amounts, the amounts that we do need play these vital life roles. If you can't clot properly, even a relatively small cut, you're going to bleed out, folks, because the clotting factors won't work and the blood will just keep pumping out, right? Okay. I think about the way that I remember vitamin K for clotting is that the beginning letters sound the same. Even though it's a C and a K, they sound the same. So vitamin K for clotting. You can read about the daily needs. I'm not going to ask you about those. You can read about too much or too little. Even though I just went on and on about the importance of vitamin K, we don't really need that much. If I go back, these units are micrograms, the funny U. That means that they're pretty small. So we don't need that much. So it ends up being pretty difficult to have a true deficiency that impacts our clotting. But that doesn't mean that it can't happen. So eat your green vegetables, folks. All right, look at that. We're already done the fat-soluble vitamins. Stick with me. We'll get through this class together. So now we're going to move over to the water-soluble vitamins, which, of course, are vitamins B and C. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we could just keep it at B and C? But vitamin B has 8 different ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the left column, and then pantothenic acid and biotin on the right column. So we have a whole grouping of B vitamins. Now, that whole group, all 8, even though there's small differences between them, all 8 of our B vitamins share a common function. They act as coenzymes. Now we talked about it, trying to remember, in the digestive chapter, when we talked about chemical digestion and the use of enzymes. So we're already familiar with enzymes. Enzymes speed up chemical reactions. Great, yes, love it. However, some enzymes need a coenzyme. So in this picture, the purple thing is the enzyme. Well, that isn't enough. In order for the enzyme to do its job, it needs this light orange salmon color thingy. So sometimes an enzyme needs a little helper called a coenzyme that literally attaches, here's the coenzyme, literally attaches right to the enzyme. And that allows the combined enzyme-coenzyme to do its job. These B vitamins are really important. I'm not saying that the others aren't important, because they're all important. But so many enzymes need a coenzyme that if we didn't have these B vitamins to help make these coenzymes, our enzymes wouldn't be able to function, and that would be really problematic. So, as a category, the B vitamins function as coenzymes, which are needed to assist enzymes, regular enzymes. Right? So we already talked about what enzymes do. They speed up chemical reactions. And you can see here, don't tell me you forgot already. Well, a lot of enzymes, not all, but a lot of enzymes also need a coenzyme. And that coenzyme is made up of B vitamins. Really important. All right. Now, if we go through the specific B vitamins, B1 vitamin is also known as thiamine. Let me just look ahead because I want to make sure that I'm being consistent about what I like you to know. Okay, here's what I'm going to say because I want to make sure. All right. Even though we're going to talk about all these different B vitamins, let's just make sure that we remind ourselves for each one helps to produce coenzymes. So it's no different. There might be some small variations. Thiamine can also help with nerve impulse transmission, fine. But most of these, well, all of them, function as coenzymes. Oh, I don't mean to put an X there. I want to put a check so you know it. Just remember that all of these collectively function as coenzymes. And a lot of these B vitamins produce coenzymes that help with metabolizing the macronutrients for energy. Remember I said this at the beginning. Vitamins don't directly produce energy. We don't break down vitamins to use for energy. But a lot of these vitamins, particularly the B vitamins, can indirectly help us metabolize carbs and fat for energy. In this case, for example, thiamine or vitamin B1 helps us to function as coenzymes that help us metabolize carbs and to a certain extent protein. So what we're saying here is we could not metabolize carbohydrates for energy without the B vitamins. They don't do it directly, but they produce coenzymes that are needed for the process. So we need B vitamins because they help indirectly with our ability to metabolize macronutrients for energy. All the rest here is extra. I'm not going to ask you this. This is an interesting thing with vitamin B1. It can be affected in alcoholics and alcohol abuse. That's just an extra little tidbit. Then we have riboflavin or B2. Let me go back to the food sources. So we can see thiamine or B1 is in whole grain foods. So we get some of our B vitamins from whole grain foods. We get other of our vitamins from dairy. And again, enriched cereals and grains. So it's not just that our milk is enriched with vitamin A and D. A lot of our cereals, granola, they're enriched. They add these B vitamins. And look, what is the function of the B2? Coenzymes that assist in metabolizing. So just think of the function collectively for all B vitamins. You don't need to know this slide. Niacin is B3. You may hear it as niacin or nicotinic acid. Guess what? It's a B vitamin. So what is its function? Functions as coenzymes that help us to metabolize other nutrients for energy. There are other functions here that you don't need to know. This is an example of a B vitamin that we can get through animal meat, both meat, land meat from land animals, and fish. But also the enriched whole grains. You can read about this, but I'm not going to ask you. Chronic deficiency can lead to this really kind of terrible looking skin disease, pellagra, but you don't need to know that. Then we have vitamin B6. This is found in everything. So I'm going to ask you. Meat, fish, fortified cereals, veggies, blah, 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 blah. What is its function? Well, it's a B vitamin. So it's a coenzyme that's going to help us to metabolize other nutrients for energy. All the B vitamins. You can read about this. I'm not going to ask you. Okay, folate. So folate is another example of a B vitamin. It's possible to get it naturally from foods, but a lot of times folic acid is a synthetic form made in a lab that's added to foods. So of course the folic acid is going to be in enriched grains. The naturally occurring B vitamins, green vegetables. Get your green vegetables. They're so good for you. Now, this is a bit of a different function that I am going to point out. So far, for all the B vitamins, we've been focusing only on the B vitamins producing coenzymes that help with macronutrient metabolism for energy. Excuse me. Well, here's another function of a B vitamin, a little bit different. So folate in particular, it is a B vitamin. It plays a really important role in making our DNA. That's what synthesis means, production of. DNA synthesis, our body's ability to produce DNA. Really important function. Because of this function, this is a particularly important vitamin for women who are pregnant. And I'm circling this because I'd like you to know it. So you will almost always see in our prenatal vitamins, folate's going to be in there because of its function in DNA synthesis. You can read at the top, you don't need to know it, but as I said, pregnant women need more. I'm not going to ask you how many more. I underlined it just to make a point. Typically, pregnant women need about twice as much. They're building a whole new human being. There's a lot of DNA that's got to be made in that new human being. You can read about too much or too little. It can lead to anemia, but you don't need to know this. All right, I think this is our last B vitamin. We talked about folate. And now our last B vitamin is vitamin B12. This is all extra. What I want to do is I want to talk about our, food sources. So just like folate, some is naturally occurring, and this would be animal meats. But naturally, we do get it in our fortified cereals. This also plays a role with DNA, but one of the important things about vitamin B12 is it also plays a role in our body's ability to produce healthy red blood cells and maintain healthy red blood cells. So this is an example of a specific function I'm pointing out. There we go, you don't need to know that. Again, if we know the regular function, helps with red blood cells. If we don't have enough, it can disrupt our red blood cells. Anemia is a condition of low red blood cell count. Okay, this is the last category of B vitamins. I apologize. The pantothenic acid and biotin. We're going to group this in with the other B vitamins. Functions as a coenzyme to help our body metabolize the macronutrients for energy. You can read about this. You don't need to know it. Look at how much information I'm going by. All right. We talked all about the B vitamins. Let's get to vitamin C. You think you know about vitamin C, but do you really know about vitamin C? We're going to give you some functions of vitamin C. We're going to give 3 of them. I know I'm asking so much. So one function that we mentioned already is it acts as an antioxidant. Just like vitamin E. Vitamin C and E, antioxidants, protect our cells. We also need vitamin C. I'm actually going to only give you 2 functions. These 2. We also need vitamin C to make a really important protein called collagen. And you've probably heard of collagen. People can get collagen injections to give structure where there isn't because of age or drooping skin, etc. But we need vitamin C to make this important protein. And we use that protein, collagen, all over the body. So really important. 2 functions. Antioxidant and needed to make collagen. We can get, of course, vitamin C from citrus fruits. Everyone knows that. But did you know, that should be a U, not an I. Looks funny, doesn't it? Sorry. We can get vitamin C from our citrus fruits, but we can also get it from tomatoes, broccoli. So we don't need to rely only on citrus, which is good because some people have allergies. I would like you to know the daily needs. This is the only time I'm asking you to know the daily needs. Men need a little bit more than women. We're talking about milligrams, so as far as it goes with vitamins, that's a higher amount. Too much or too little? Too little can lead to something called scurvy, which can affect the gums and the skin. It's no longer a problem because we have vitamin C in our diet usually. But, scurvy was a problem when people were taking transatlantic voyages in the 17th and 18th centuries, right? They were on the ship for 2 or 3 months without access to any fresh fruit or vegetables that were fresh. But right now, it's no longer a problem. So I want to talk about this. You look at orange juice, great way. In addition to giving vitamin C, this contains vitamin C, 100% of the recommended daily allowance on a 2,000 calorie diet. This contains 120% of vitamin C based on a 2,000 calorie diet. But look at the added sugar. So sometimes if we get more of a juice, not just orange, even regular orange juice is going to have some sugar. But the added sugar is going to be in our other juices, so not always a good thing. Yeah, you're getting your vitamin C, but you're also getting a lot of unnecessary added sugar. Here we go. Myths and facts about the common cold. Can the emergency pack? Can taking vitamin C prevent illness? No. No, no, no. There is no consistent research that is causal that says vitamin C will prevent colds. Now, anecdotally, which just means that some people report that, but when we do a study and we have one group take the vitamin C and one group not, there's no significant difference. So vitamin C is not the end-all. It's going to cure everything. No, no, no. It does act as an antioxidant, but it's not going to prevent you from getting a cold. You get a cold from a virus. Someone sneezed in your direction. You touched a doorknob that someone else touched. That's the virus. Now, is having enough vitamin C going to help your immune system be a little better? Yes. So it may help your immune system to be a little bit better, but it's not going to cure the virus. You should know that. Be a good question for me to ask. Okay, so I hope you saw that it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Use that vitamins overview handout to simplify. This is going to be a lot of memorization. You only need to know what we talked about. Some odds and ends before we finish this chapter out. What is the best way to get your vitamins? You're not going to be surprised to hear me say this. Food is the best way to go. Food is the best way to go. Well-balanced diet. You may have heard what I'm going to say, and you might poo-poo it as whatever, but it's true. Make your diet include all colors. So it shouldn't be all brown with meats or beige with potatoes. We should have some green vegetables. We should have some red vegetables or fruits like tomatoes. So if you have a more colorful diet, and I'm not talking about like gummy bears. They're colorful, but they're not going to add any vitamins. Natural foods. If we get a lot of color in our diet, that usually means we're going to have a much better chance at meeting our vitamin intake. Fortified foods are already there for us, and they do a decent job. So your fortified cereals, pretty good. Raisin Bran. This lays out from the old food guide pyramid where vitamins are going to be found in each food group. You do not need to know this, but they're found in a lot, so get a good mixture. Did you notice, in addition to our greens, leafy greens, something else that was a theme, whole grain foods and vegetables. So a lot of these vitamins are whole grain foods and vegetables and fruits. I did not have a picture of a cheeseburger. Because that's not going to be the way to get your vitamins. I mean, in this cheeseburger and fries, where are we getting our vitamins? Well, there's some vitamins in the meat. There's some vitamins in the white potato, but not much. Where's the color? This is colorful. Yay. It's not rocket science. It takes a little bit of effort, but it can absolutely be done. What about vitamin supplementation? Well, definitely not. It's never as good as eating the real food. So when possible, get all your needs through the real diet. There are some instances where a supplement may really be necessary. I talked about some of the B vitamins in pregnant women. Some of these vitamins were found only in meat sources, so therefore vegetarian or vegan might have a more difficult time. Doesn't mean that vegetarian needs to take a vitamin supplement. They can get it from other foods, but it will be more difficult. I've already gone through this probably a lot. Supplements are not regulated well. We don't know what's in them. There's no consistency. We don't really have the data. So you're kind of putting in an unknown into your body, when instead you could be putting in tomatoes and vegetables and yummy things. So just to review, the FDA does not regulate supplements. Now, usually, the FDA has some overseeing role. The FDA usually has a role in saying what can be on a label. And a lot of times, the supplement companies just have to submit some paperwork, and that's usually what it is. Unlike things that are approved by the FDA, like Tylenol or whatever, that need to go through vigorous scientific method, scientific studies that are objective, these supplements don't. They just have to submit some paperwork and then they can go on the shelves. So you've got to really be careful. All right, good job. If you have any questions, I'm always here.